But what I'd like to do is start off with the very first talk, Larry Wolfgang. Larry had an interesting experience. He decided he wanted to do surface mount. So he had this particular kit that was presented at the DCC a couple of years ago, and he decided it was time to put it together. And Larry is going to tell us about his adventure of putting a kit together that had surface mount components. So let me introduce Larry Wolfgang, WR1B.
As it's been mentioned, I'm the QEX editor. I'm also the technical correspondence editor for QST. And so, well, you didn't really think you were going to get away without some sort of commercial break, so we'll just start right off with that. I'm sure everybody's familiar with the ARRL webpage, but really, the important thing is right over here in the corner, it says QEX. And that's where you want to go. When you go to this page, you want to go right over there, and you want to click on QEX. And then that's going to take you to our QEX section. And here you can learn about QEX if you're not familiar with it. Each issue, we post the cover image from that issue, and then we also post a sample article along with the letters and the table of contents. So you can see what's in the issue. You can read a sample article and get an idea for the flavor of what's there. And that's usually posted about the same time the magazine is coming out, maybe a few days ahead of time, but not too much. So you can check that out and see what's there. And we keep the issues posted for a while. Eventually they drop off the bottom, but they're there for a while, so you can see what's been in some past issues and what we're doing. So hopefully you take a look at that occasionally and see what's going on. If you're not a subscriber, maybe it'll spark some interest. Like I said, a couple of issues there that you can see what's been in the issue. You can always look at that sample and what's been in the magazine. So today I was asked to talk about surface mount construction. And, it's not just for breakfast anymore. I don't know, I guess because I'm the first one up, so we've got to move beyond breakfast at this point. And really, I started out, I made my big mistake when I mentioned to Steve and to Scotty that, I'd had this experience, and maybe I could put together like an introductory session for tomorrow that for those people who hadn't really tried this, we could sort of have an informal little discussion and I could do some encouraging. And so somehow I ended up here. And I guess, at least the good thing we learned last year, put me up first so you don't have anybody to compare me to. And then, maybe my presentation doesn't seem so bad, at least at the time. So it works out, whatever we need to do. Well, so I just want to survey, show of hands, how many people in this room think surface mount construction is old hat? You've been doing it for years, it's no big deal, and this is, that's kind of what I was afraid of. So I don't know. I mean, I'm not really talking to you folks, right? I need to learn from you rather than you from me. So I don't know what we do. Well, at least I can tell you a story about my experience and my first attempt at doing some surface mount construction. And for those who haven't tried it, maybe it gives you some ideas. I know a fellow who used to say, nobody or nothing is completely worthless. It can always serve as a bad example. So if I've done some things that don't make any sense here, and those of you who are experienced, I'm looking for feedback, but also maybe you'll learn some things not to do as well. Well, kind of what I found is, in the end, it wasn't as difficult as I thought. It wasn't. I was pretty intimidated, but in the end, it was building. And the two things that I found I needed most were some patience and some magnification. Now, I like building things. I've been building things for a long time. I like building kits. I like where everything's included. I can lay it all out. There's a set of instructions, and, sometimes the instructions are excellent, sometimes the instructions aren't quite so detailed. But when it's a kit, I don't have to go searching all around for different things, and then, something doesn't quite fit the way it was intended to and all that. So I like kits. I mean, my very first kit was a Night Kit T60. That was my first transmitter. I started building that when I was waiting for my novice license to show up from the FCC. And those of you who might remember back in the mid to late 60s, you had a little bit of a wait till your license showed up. So, I got the kit, and I guess I had it nearly all constructed by the time my license showed up and I could get on the air. Over the years, I've built a lot of stuff. Anybody remember Heathkit? One of the first product reviews that I did at ARRL was the Heathkit HW5400. It was a full-blown HF transceiver. It was quite a project. A little intimidating, because it was such a big thing, but you sort of broke it down, and I say it was a big project because I could see all the components. I could see where they were supposed to go on the circuit board, and I'd pick them up in my hands and look at them and put them on the circuit board, and it wasn't so bad. It was fun. More recently, I've built the Elecraft K2, and you might have read the review of that in QST as well, in the 100-watt amplifier. So I've been building stuff, and I've got quite a bit of experience. It's fun, so I enjoy that. Well, there's a lot of neat stuff in QEX. I mean, if you haven't noticed that, I'll say it again. But 2 years ago at the DCC, Milt Cram and George Heron were showing the new PSK. That's W8NUE is Milt. So the NUE, new PSK, little modem. And it was a really nifty project. And we were pretty excited. We actually reviewed that for article acceptance about 2 days before that DCC. And so we had a brief introduction, and then I went to the DCC. It was up in Hartford at that time. And there it was. What a neat little project. Well, when they said they were going to produce kits, I thought that was a pretty neat thing, and I decided to get in on, that early stage of getting one of those kits. So I got this box in the mail, and here was the kit. So I opened the box, and I looked inside there, and, there's parts and circuit board. I mean, it's a lot like any other kit that I've looked at. But then when I kind of looked closer, I saw that some of these parts were really small. I mean, they were tiny. Now, when I ordered the kit, it had never been said, but there had been some implication that since they were going to offer this as completely built units as well as kits, that the tiny little surface mount ICs were going to already be placed commercially. And then the task would be placing, the bigger components, the resistors and capacitors and stuff like that. So when I opened the kit and I discovered that it was a bare circuit board, and there were some really tiny parts. I packed it up again. I said, I don't know if I can do this. I'm going to have to really spend some time to even dive into this. So I set it aside, and I went on with, everything else I was doing. And, occasionally, I'd be going out to do a scout demo or something, and I'd think, wow, if I could show PSK, the kids would really love that. That would be really cool. But, since I don't have a laptop that I haul around, and that's, battery limitations and everything anyway, and I'd think, boy, maybe I should get that kit out, and if I could put that together, that would be really cool. So I'd get the box out again, and I'd open it up, and I'd look at the parts, and these parts are really tiny. I mean, right here is where this tiny little IC inside this pouch gets mounted. So I'd pack it up again and I'd say, I can't do that. I don't know how to do that. It's, you know, and I'd talk to people, well, how do you do this? You know, and they'd give me suggestions, and, you know, some of the folks that have been doing it for so long, it's like, oh, no big deal, you just do this and that, and you're all done with it, you know. And I'd think, yeah, I guess I should try that. So I'd open it up again and I'd look at it. And you know, some of these parts are really tiny. I mean, do you have any idea how big these resistors are? They're tiny. And there's this pad here where this IC has to be mounted. Now, I actually put a ruler on here one day. That's about a 1/2 inch square. It's really tiny. So I'd pack it up and I'd say, I don't even know how to begin doing this. You know, and I'd talk to some people some more, and they'd say, you know, oh, well, do this, do that, you know, and it's not that bad, you know. And I even had George Heron offer to put it together for me, or to at least put that IC on for me. And I said, but you know, I mean, I've been building stuff for 30-some years. I've built complex projects. I can do this. I know I can do this. But gosh, these things are tiny. So I'd look at it again. And, well, this past field day, I had gone out, and this was the first time in a number of years that I actually went to field day with a radio club. 5 or 6 years back, my wife and I decided that it would be fun to go do field day together. And we went, you know, took an extended weekend, went camping, and operated field day. And we did field day from one of my favorite campgrounds as a kid in Pennsylvania. We did field day from Rhode Island a couple of years. We did field day in Connecticut. So we were having a good time doing that, and I just wasn't going out with the clubs. But this year, it wasn't going to work for us to go somewhere, so I decided I'd go out with one of the clubs that goes to a youth camping area nearby. And I thought, well, that would work. And so I did, and we had a good time, and they had a good bunch of operators. And one of the things I noticed was, you know, everybody sort of brought what they wanted to do at field day. And we took turns operating and so forth. But nobody was doing any digital modes. You know, and it struck me that, boy, if I had ever built this new PSK, this would be perfect. I mean, it operates on batteries. I could just sit here with my K2 and the new PSK, and I could run, you know, some digital contacts, and that would be cool. So I guess I got a little more motivation. So, you know, I got the board out again, and, you know, I mean, under a magnifying glass, I mean, here it is, right here. Look at this. It's tiny. Even through the magnifying glass, it's tiny. You know, I could take the photo and I can zoom in. I mean, this is a 1/2 inch, right? A 1/2 inch. And you got to figure that these 16 pins on a side, and they don't even stretch the whole 1/2 inch, right? It's less than a 1/2 inch. 64 pins. How am I going to do that? That's really hard. But I got to try it. So, well, I kind of set everything up. Well, take a break here because you're going to see some different slides. I actually built it and had some difficulties that I'll talk about, but I got it working. And then, of course, about the time I was getting it working, or, well, sometime before that, I had heard that they had this USB port so you can plug in a thumb drive and save the text that you're sending and receiving. And so I thought that would be cool. So I ordered one of those, and I opened it up, and, sure enough, it's got, like, really tiny parts. And it's got another pick with really tiny spacing between the leads. So Well, I took some pictures, with that to try to illustrate this talk. So the circuit board, it's handy to have tweezers to handle these things, a soldering station, and of course, magnification. You really got to be able to magnify it. I mean, here's the DS pick, here's the space it's got to go through the magnifier. Zoom, and a nice thing about photos, you can zoom in. And there's more about that later too. So here's kind of the workstation, a few tools. I like having one of these dental picks. Back when I first got my dental pick, I begged it from my dentist. And now you can buy them at hamfests and flea markets. They're pretty common. But it's a handy little tool for moving stuff around, and especially these tiny little pieces and holding them down and things. So I find that to be handy. The tweezers also is handy for picking up some of the parts. So how are you going to solder these to the board? Well, there's a couple of different methods that are commonly discussed. And the one method that I've heard a lot about is solder paste and heat. And for heat, people are using toaster ovens or heat guns, although the heat guns typically have too much air pressure. And so apparently the danger is that you turn the heat gun on and all of a sudden you have a bare board again instead of all those little components that were laying there. But then I've heard that the rubber stamping embossing tool, which I don't know if anybody done rubber stamping, but my wife is into that. And you stamp the ink on the paper, and then you sprinkle this pixie dust over the ink, and then there's this tool that heats the pixie dust, and it sort of puffs up and attaches itself to the paper. And it has to be hot, but not a whole lot of airflow, because the airflow would blow the pixie dust all over. So I'm told that would work very well. And since I have one of those, I think that's probably worth trying. I never did quite figure out about getting the solder paste. People have told me, I've heard, it has to be kept at certain low temperatures and it's hard to buy. And others have said, you can find it on the internet. And, the thing is, I can't stop at Cables and Connectors on my way to work in the morning and walk in and say, I need a tube of solder paste. They don't have it. And so I never got there. I think it's still, worthwhile, but I haven't done that. So really thin solder and a soldering iron is the route that I went, because I could walk into Cables and Connectors and get this really thin solder, and I have a temperature-controlled soldering station, so that seemed like the way to go. And I guess the key is to align the pins and tack solder one corner, and then try to make sure that everything's lined up, and tack solder another corner, and always check the pin alignment. So if you've got two corners tacked down and the pins are all aligned, then you're pretty much good to go, right? And I see a few heads nodding. So once you've got everything lined up, now the hard thing for me, at this point, I solder things one lead at a time, right? I've soldered IC sockets and even ICs where you just go one lead, and 16 or 20 around the board, and you've got the IC soldered in place. But on this, remember, this is really tiny. So you just slather the solder down the row of pins. And you just go right down there with your soldering iron and you run the solder down there and you make like one big blob of solder. And then you soak up the excess with some solder wick. And so that's sort of the technique. So here's the circuit board. There's the IC in place. But, I'm looking through this magnified lens, and I can sort of see it, but I really need more magnification. It's just not enough. And of all the magnifiers I have, and I tried a couple of different ones, and I tried, they've got some lighted magnifiers in the lab at work, but they weren't any better than the one I've got on my desk at home, and I just couldn't see it. So here's what I did. And I said, there's probably better ways. I was talking to Mel last night, and he was talking about his binoculars or binocular microscope, and different techniques that, cameras and so forth that people have used. What worked for me was to take a photo. So I got out my trusty Nikon, and I focused the magnifying lens on the board, and then I looked down through the magnifying lens and focused the camera and snapped a couple of pictures. And then I can blow the pictures up. So here's an enlargement. And now with it enlarged, I can kind of see, well, first thing I can see is this isn't quite aligned right, because I can see these pins now as they're magnified. So over here they actually look pretty good. Not even too bad here, but for some reason over here they don't look so good. And to be honest with you, when I first built this, I didn't know about this technique. I was trying to do it all through the magnifying lens. And so after I had my DS PIC soldered down, I went ahead and, it looked good to me. As far as I could tell, it looked good. And I figured that was the best I could do. So I put all the other components on, and then when I first powered it up, it didn't work. And that's not completely uncommon, but I'm pretty much used to when I finish the project, it pretty much works. I mean, I don't normally have problems with cold solder joints or some of the other problems because I've done it enough, but it didn't work. And so I was trying to figure out why. And eventually, I talked to Milt Cram, and Milt said, well, the most common thing is that some pins are shorted next to each other, or pins not soldered down correctly or something like that. And I thought, well, how can I see that? I can't see it. And that's when it occurred to me that I could take a picture and enlarge the picture. And then what I could see on my original was that I had about 3 pins that looked like they were actually bent a little bit, and they were bridging over to the next solder pad. But once I could identify that, I could go in with the tip of my soldering iron and a big heavy straight pin, like a hat pin type thing. And I didn't know what else to do. So I heated, and I just sort of put some pressure with that pin right on that lead, and I kind of bent it back into place. And I did that on the 3 leads that looked like they might have been shorting, and I said, well, let's see. I powered it up, and guess what? It worked. So I think I found something that worked for me. And then, of course, the trick is do that before you have the whole thing soldered down, and try to make sure that the pins are aligned. So another try, another photo. Looks pretty good. It looks pretty good, except there's something funky going on over here. And I'm not sure it really shows up on this enlargement, but it kind of looks like one of these pins is bent a little bit. So at that point, well, I took it off, and I worked on that a bit. I had gotten some solder globbed in there from trying to tack it down. And so I got it straightened out, and then I think it looked better. So once you've got the 2 corners tacked down and all the pins aligned, then you go in and you just slather the solder down the row of pins. And after you have this, glob of solder down the whole side of the IC, you go in with some solder wick and just, again, lay the solder wick across there. With your soldering iron, you run it down along, and it cleans it right up. And you got a pretty nice solder connection that way. Now, I mentioned this to somebody at one point not too long ago, and they said, oh, yeah, I've got lots of solder wick. It's the braid off of RG8 or something like that. That may work. I don't know. But personally, I would go, buy a little spool of the real solder wick And that comes in different thicknesses, and I have like a medium size, but probably the small stuff for some of these, and you know, that's what I would recommend. That seemed to work pretty well for me. Okay, so you've soldered the IC, you've cleaned it up. The solder wick, again, the real stuff does a beautiful job. I was sort of amazed. I mean, I've used that to try to clean components and holes on circuit boards for rework and stuff, and it does pretty good. It does pretty good, but it worked great for this. You know, that whole blob of solder was gone. I could clearly see the space between the pins and everything. You know, I was afraid it would leave bridges, but it didn't. Something's not quite perfect there, but this was, I was picking some pictures to put the talk together, but it's pretty close. But, you know, with the enlarged photo, again, you can get a pretty good look at what's going on. So that was my method of magnification. All right, and of course, that was the hard one. Now, whether you really should start with the hardest one, I don't know. But, you know, the instructions kind of implied that, well, this was where you were going to need the most patience. And if you spent 90% of the time building the kit, getting this one part in place, you know, that was going to be a good thing. And so I thought, you know, if I'm going to have problems, you know, why waste my time doing all the easy stuff? So I started with the hard one. And then after that, I mean, there were some other ICs that are almost as big as the standard dips. They were a piece of cake. You know, resistors and capacitors, that was nothing. I mean, there's only 2 leads. You lay that on there, you tack one down, you tack the other down, you're done. That was nothing. So, you know, challenge, you know, have fun. Melt some solder, build something. And then the proof of the pudding, as they say, is in the pie. When it works, when it lights up, when you're copying signals, that's neat. That's neat. Here was a guy, he was calling CQ, trying to make his triple play award with the PSK contacts, and you know, so he had a whole list of states that he was looking for. Connecticut wasn't one of them, so I didn't bother answering him. But you know, he had his list, and he was calling CQ, and perfect print, perfect print. It's fun. So, is there anything better than feeling you get when you build a project and it works? You know, making a contact with something that you actually built yourself. Boy, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. I mean, I'm sure there are things better than that, but this ranks right up there. You know, this ranks right up there. I mean, you know, standing out on the, you know, on the mountaintop looking out, or looking at the mountains, or, you know, going out to visit my son and going to see Yellowstone, that was pretty cool. But this ranks right up there. It's a high point to build something and get it, you know, have it work and make contacts and use it on the air. So say, try it yourself. Now, Scotty got the idea of actually setting up a demo spot here. And so he arranged John Ackerman brought a soldering station, and Scotty brought some boards and components. And so out in the demo room, we've got a space, and if you haven't done this, I invite you to come out and, you know, take a look at it and try soldering some parts. He's got some resistors, so those are fairly easy. You can give that a try. And if you're adventurous and you want to try something bigger or smaller, as the case may be, he's got some FPGAs and some boards from one of the HPSDR projects. So, you know, invite you to come out and check that out and give it a try. So find a project that interests you, you know, and it doesn't have to be a kit. Like I said, I like kits. And then when you build the nifty project, you know, keep in mind we're looking for articles for QEX, and it doesn't necessarily need to be something completely new. It might just be your perspective on something. So think about what you might write up, because if you don't do it, who will? So I want to thank you for your attention. And I think I probably have a few minutes. If there are any questions or comments, tell me what I've done wrong. Tell me, what's better. I should mention that the folks who said, use the solder paste and the heat, one of the things they told me was that when you put the solder paste down and you set the IC roughly in place, when you heat it, it and sucks it right into position. And that's attractive, especially after struggling to get this lined up. So I'm going to have to try that. But I've got to investigate and actually go and take the step of buying the solder paste and I guess keeping it cold until I get around to doing it. But that's that. David?
Do you use liquid flux, like a syringe, and you just irrigate it around the chip before you solder it?
You know what? I didn't. I didn't have liquid flux. I've never used liquid flux. I didn't really know about liquid flux. But I actually bought a second new PSK kit. Came in the mail last week because I needed to get some photos for this talk when it became more than just a little introductory, sort of little talk. And when that kit came, there was a pen in there. And so the shots that I took of the USB board when I was working on that to get some photos, I did put the flux down. I don't know how much difference it made. It certainly didn't hurt.
Okay, question on magnification. Have you used the headband with magnifiers? Looked like a pair of glasses.
Yeah, my wife has one of those for some sewing work and all, and it has an insert that goes up to 2 power, and 2 power doesn't do the job. So I don't know how much higher power. I know Scotty's got a couple of those here with the station. The other thing that I don't like about the headband is that I can't seem to really, get it focused. I'm moving my head around, and then when I go to look at something else, I've moved. So I struggle with that. I like, much better, I like working under the lighted lens, the big lens that I can position. I got it in focus. Now, if I look away and come back, it's right there because I didn't move the lens. But that's just my preference.
Larry, I would suggest, first of all, you need at least 5 or 6 power. And the other thing I wanted to know is, are you going to build the second kit without opening the box 4 times?
Yes. Yes, I am. I've had the box open. I've had the parts out to take some of these photos. And I'm not nearly as intimidated as I was the first time. And that's a good point, because that's really what I'm trying to convey. If you haven't tried this, you can get beyond that sort of trepidation and fear to just dive in and give it a try. And that's what I'm encouraging you to do. I do think that before I put that DS pick on the board, I'm going to take the step of finding the solder paste and try the heat technique, because that sounds pretty interesting too.
Yeah, just one comment on the goggles versus the magnifier lamp. I've tried both of them. I guess my preference is probably just a little different from yours. My problem is that I kept hitting the lamp with my nose, and then it would rock, and I would get dizzy because it would be going back and forth. So maybe I'm just mechanically challenged, but I like the goggles myself, and you can get the Bosch & Lomb ones with glass lenses, and they're about $60, so they're not real cheap, but they'll last a long time. They have a very nice adjuster on the back, and you can get an eye loop attachment. So what I do is, and you'll see the ones out there, please feel free to come out and check those out, and you can try those before you make your decision whether to buy a lamp or maybe you need both. But I found about 2.5 power for the big lenses, and then another 3 power for the eye loop, which is you can flip that down in front of your eye or keep it out of the way. So that way I can get the big view of getting the part rotated right and get it over the pins that I need, the pads that I want. But then I can flip the eye loop down and I get 2 times 2.5 or 3 times 2.5. I get about 6 power, 7 power, and then I can zoom right in and I can check those corner pins out like where you were maybe having that problem. So it's kind of like the best of both worlds with one tool. So maybe that would help.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I have not tried the eye loop nor the higher power for the headband, and that might make a difference. And I'm sure that at least part of it is personal preference as well. And so, yeah, it's worth looking at a couple of different options, no question.
When you slather the solder on the leads and then use the solder wick to get rid of the excess solder, wouldn't that tend to take the solder off the leads as well?
Well, all you really need is solder under the lead, between the lead and the board, and it doesn't take that solder off. Yeah, as a matter of fact, that was when I did the first one, and I looked at it, and I thought, wow, did it take all the solder off? But then I realized, no, the leads are still stuck down. But it does. It cleans the top off perfectly. So there's no buildup of solder, and really there's not enough space there to have much buildup of solder because then it's going to be bridging.
Well, just 3 things that might be helpful to some folks. I find that in addition to the magnification, the amount of light I have available is critical. And I don't know if this is peculiar to me, but I have one of those Circline Luxo type lamps, and I use it sometimes, but I also have a very nice thing that was sold for fly fishermen. That's a gooseneck magnifier, and then an independent light that I can adjust the angle of it, much like a microscopist does, when he fiddles with the mirror or the light source, because sometimes you want the light coming in at an oblique angle while you're looking at it from a little different one to see between the pins and so forth. Yeah, and let's see. One other point is I use the wire solder a lot. I have both the paste and the wire solder, but there's actually .015 solder available from Radio Shack, believe it or not. It's got some silver in it, but that really makes a difference for me and makes it pretty competitive with the paste solder. The paste solder has a little more flux in it, at least when it's fresh, but the flux deteriorates.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Larry.